Thank you. Gentleman from Colorado is recognized for whatever questions he has to the panel.
I thank the chairman. First, let me just say I'll thank the gentleman, Mr. Massey, for reminding us of one of the darkest days in the history of our republic, January 6th. And by the way, a day that ultimately led to a permissible and appropriate and prudent and necessary impeachment when former President Trump was impeached for his conduct leading up to and, of course, including January 6th. I find it fascinating that my friend from Kentucky takes issue with the work of the committee, apparently shows great interest in the work of the committee. I believe he voted against creating the Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on our nation's capital, a bipartisan committee that was led with great distinction and integrity by then Chairman, now Ranking Member Thompson. I think it's patently absurd to ask questions regarding what was a thorough and comprehensive multi-year investigation without giving the benefit to the witnesses of having the report and the evidentiary record to be able to answer the gentleman's questions. By the way, of course, we're here on a completely different subject, the baseless impeachment that House Republicans have initiated against Secretary Mayorkas. I, for one, am grateful for the work that the January 6th committee did and for Chairman Thompson's leadership of the same. I have a number of questions with respect to the actual subject that we are gathered here today to talk about, but before I get into that, I do want to give Chairman Thompson, Ranking Member Thompson, an opportunity, to the extent he'd like one, to respond and perhaps make any comments with respect to the gentleman from Kentucky's soliloquy or diatribe or whatever we want to call it.
Well, whatever the gentleman from Kentucky has uncovered, it's still not too late to provide that information to the authorities, and hopefully we can capture some people. And I would encourage him to do so. I think we all ought to be embarrassed at what happened on January 6th, but we also should fear some of the danger that went on that day. And I hope our report talks about how misinformation improperly promulgated causes people to do strange things, including planting pipe bombs. So if there's evidence somewhere between ATF, Secret Service, FBI, I think they should be made aware of the videos, and I look forward to, if the chairman decides to move on some subpoenas with whomever, it will be a good opportunity to add to the record of the work of the Select Committee.
I thank the ranking member, and again, extend to him, I think, our gratitude for the work that the Select Committee on January 6th accomplished. Chairman Green, I want to talk to you about the subject that we're gathered here to talk about, which is the impeachment proceedings that you've initiated and the resolution against Secretary Mayorkas. It's pretty clear to me, I suspect to most Americans who've been watching this proceeding and who watch the proceeding tomorrow on the floor, that this is a total waste of time. It is going nowhere, and it is a distraction from the real necessary work that Congress needs to perform to address the consequential challenges that we face as a country. Chairman Green, I have an editorial here. I'm going to enter it into the record. The title is "Americans Are the Victims of the Impeachment Inquiry." It's an opinion piece. The subtext is, "A lot of bipartisan legislation that enjoys widespread support sits gathering dust while Congress focuses on the impeachment inquiry." I assume you disagree with this?
I do.
You do. It's interesting. These are your words. This is an editorial that you wrote 5 years ago during the debate about the impeachment of former President Trump. It's written by Mark Green, guest columnist in the Tennessean, local newspaper, I take it, in your state.
It is indeed, Nashville.
Americans are the victims of the impeachment inquiry. A lot of bipartisan legislation that enjoys widespread support sits gathering dust while Congress focuses on the impeachment inquiry. It's fascinating to me that you've changed your tune, and I'll ask that this. I'll give you a chance to respond in a moment, Mr. Chairman. I'll ask that this be entered into the record.
Without objection.
Part of the challenge for me and so many of my colleagues on this side of the aisle is the hypocrisy that unfortunately we see from our colleagues who argue one thing, and then a week later, a month later, a year later, 4 years later, as the case may be in this instance, argue the exact opposite. Now, the chairman, or the former chairman, our ranking member, Mr. McGovern, asked you, Mr. Green, Chairman Green, a series of questions about process. And I want to give you a chance, to perhaps expound upon a bit of this and maybe explain to me and the American public your thinking. Is it your contention that you went into this impeachment proceeding with an open mind? You're not, I assume, taking that position, right?
It depends on sort of the process when someone becomes convinced that it's the right thing to do. Sure. I can't tell you exactly the day when I said, no, this really is, he needs to be impeached.
Can you give me a time period? A season?
Gosh, I mean,
Spring,
we started
fall,
this
winter?
almost as soon as we got into the majority. So, no, I couldn't tell you when.
Okay,
I made the decision.
It seems like you were about to say maybe springtime, which would comport with the New York Times article that Chairman McGovern mentioned. And I know, and I'll give you a chance to, perhaps if you want to, again, expound upon this. That article is from April of last year. This is a quote from that article. The Republican chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee promised donors this month that he would produce an impeachment case against the Biden administration's Homeland Security Chief, Alejandro Mayorkas, saying that the secretary's appearance before the panel this week would be the beginning of his demise, end quote. So this is before your committee has heard from Secretary Mayorkas. It's before you've had the witnesses that apparently have come before your committee. It's before you've had any meaningful debate. You decide a year ago, maybe a little less than a year ago, that you're impeaching him.
That's not what we said.
So is this article inaccurate?
Yeah, parts of it are actually.
And you take, as Mr. McGovern.
I've been queried about this many times.
Okay, well, I think it's important to get to the bottom of that because apparently the New York Times, at least in this article, says this is based on audio recordings of you at this event, that apparently Mr. Jordan, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee on which I serve, was also in attendance. So, if that's inaccurate, I think you should get it corrected because to me, it seems like, and I just can tell you, as the American people begin to dig into this and learn more, I think what it will seem like to them is that this process was rigged, that it was stacked, that at the end, and I know that you all and House Republicans and my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have taken issue when you believe that an impeachment proceeding is rigged or stacked from the very beginning, as this impeachment proceeding was. And just to give you an example of this, in October of 2019, your office issued a statement. This was following your vote against initiating an impeachment inquiry against former President Trump. The first 4 words of this press release, quote, "The vote is rigged." The next 4 words, "The deck is stacked. That's why I will be voting no on today's resolution to formalize the impeachment inquiry against President Trump." So you took issue with a rigged process in your view, what you characterized as a rigged process back then. 5 years later, you're head of this committee. You're, apparently telling folks that you were going to proceed with impeaching Secretary Mayorkas 10 months before you actually initiate those articles. I don't know how you square that, but I'll give you an opportunity.
Yeah, thanks. No, we started a 5-phase process almost as soon as we came in here looking at I'll give you the 5 phases: dereliction of duty. The second phase was how the open border had, empowered the drug cartels. The third phase was the human cost, and we brought in all sorts of people to talk about human trafficking and the deaths of fentanyl and things like that. We had a phase that was the costs. And I mean, it's huge, 400 and something billion dollars that the open borders cost in the economy, and then waste, the empty ice beds, the empty hotel beds. This took several, I mean, almost a year. I mean, we've been at this almost a year. So
Can I ask you about that
to suggest that it's some kind of abbreviated, rushed process that's fabricated or whatever. I don't remember your exact words, but that's not fair. That's not a fair characterization. This has been a very thorough, systematic process that was done to get to the details and produce a report that's 400 pages long.
I hear you. Let me ask you about the 5-phase plan, because it's interesting. Apparently, you say that some of these quotes are misquoted in terms of this New York Times article. The 5-phase plan piece of it was not.
That's right. We talked about what the intentions were, but not what the conclusion is.
I see.
Yeah, very important.
So the part where the New York Times says, quote, that you had a, quote, 5-phase plan for doing so, and that the Homeland Security would, quote, put together a packet and we will hand it to Jim Jordan and let Jim do what Jim does best. That part is true. The part where you say that you're proceeding with impeaching Secretary Mayorkas, that part is false? That's the...
I'd have to go back and look at that again, but this is what I do know. I have looked at it in the past. This was months ago when it was brought up by my colleagues on the committee, and there were aspects of that article that were not true. That's what I do know.
I will. I'll move on to talking a bit about the process.
Okay.
That press release that I quoted in 2019 your office identified a number of issues that you took with respect to the process that the former President Trump experienced in terms of the first impeachment back in 2019. You stated, and at that time, this resolution, this is a quote, this resolution consolidates Adam Schiff's power and cuts out the small number of members who've been able to take part in hearings so far by moving the jurisdiction to Schiff's Intelligence Committee, okay? End quote. Now, I know you understand this as the chairman of the Homeland Security Committee. The Judiciary Committee has conventionally, traditionally, by centuries of precedent, been considered the committee that marks up articles, right?
Yeah, that's why I mentioned in the article you quoted, I was talking about.
Exactly, right? I hear you. In this case, impeachment was done exclusively within the Homeland Security Committee, right?
By a vote for the House floor with 201 Democrats voting.
Understand.
And the motion made by the Democrats,
and apparently, you take no issue with the fact that this proceeding was limited to the Homeland Security Committee, to a small group of members to participate. You took great issue with this same approach 5 years ago. Again, part of my frustration, and I think the frustration that the American people experience, is this sense of hypocrisy, that this isn't on the level. I'll give you another example. This perhaps was the most astounding example of all. This press release states, and I'll quote, this is in reference to the impeachment resolution, the resolution subjects the minority's subpoena authority to Schiff's whims and refuses to guarantee that the minority's witnesses will even be called, end quote. Ranking Member Thompson, did you have subpoena authority in this proceeding?
To
call witnesses?
Yes.
And was that authority limited anyway? Did it require the approval of the chairman or any kind of assent?
In terms of, repeat it again, your question.
With respect to the subpoena authority that the minority had in Homeland Security in this proceeding, you weren't able to call witnesses that you believed were deemed relevant.
No.
It required the assent of the chairman.
Yeah, well, we had 2 hearings, basically. We were able to afford witnesses, but that's it. We did not subpoena anyone.
Got it. You didn't have subpoena authority.
No.
So, to that end, and as the ranking member has articulated, in 2019, Mr. Chairman Green, you took great issue with the notion that...
And I voted against this one coming to my committee, just so you know.
Well, I appreciate that you voted against it coming to your committee, but of course I'll yield to...
No, I think we want to be a little bit more honest here with everybody about the circumstances to which this was referred to the committee. It wasn't that there was this bipartisan consensus that we should investigate Secretary Mayorkas and send it to the Homeland Security Committee. Basically, we were responding to an initiative by Marjorie Taylor Greene.
That's right.
Yet another one of her impeachment resolutions. And the choice was either a snap impeachment on the spot or a referral. The idea that this is a bipartisan consensus to refer it to the Homeland Security Committee to pursue this is just disingenuous. It's just not the case. It was either a snap impeachment or it was this.
Precisely.
I thank you.
I couldn't agree more. And again, Chairman Green, to the extent that you believed that Ranking Member Thompson and the minority on the Homeland Security Committee ought to have the ability to have subpoena power, as you apparently believed 5 years ago when you voted against the impeachment inquiry against President Trump for that very same reason, you could have easily articulated that. You did not. So, again, the hypocrisy. Go ahead.
Yeah, we have a policy in the committee. If he wants to subpoena somebody, he can come to me and we do it. We issue the subpoena. He never came to me asking to subpoena anybody, and we authored every witness he asked to bring got to come.
The resolution, again, the issue that Ranking Member Thompson, of course, is happy to yield.
Well, it not necessarily a subpoena, but we asked for a minority day on the committee, and it was denied.
Denied.
It was not denied. We haven't posted a date on it yet. We're following Chairman Nadler's
After the
policy.
impeachment?
That's exactly what happened before in 2019.
So your contention is that apparently will work to schedule a minority day in which you'll be able to hear witnesses after you voted to impeach?
As Chairman Nadler said, there is no precedent for it happening before the articles are brought. Quoting Chairman Nadler,
Again,
the Judiciary Committee,
Chairman,
which you sit on.
These are the very same processes that you railed against 5 years ago. This is my point. So, I mean, I get it. I understand. I hear you. You're in the majority. You make the rules. But spare us this sort of sense that any of this is intellectually honest or candid. It is not. It's folks saying one thing one day, and then, 5 years later, as the winds shift, saying the other. In any event, I will move on. I will say, I thought that the effort that Ranking Member Thompson and Homeland Security Democrats made to offer an amendment that would have provided standard due process, at least at the bare minimum, to Secretary Mayorkas in the impeachment process was prudent, and the fact that it was rejected by House Republicans in that committee and opposed by you, Mr. Chairman, and every Republican on your committee, I don't understand how that vote can be justified, but that's for you to defend. And Ranking Member, to the extent you'd like to talk about that, I'd welcome it.
Well, I think one of the fundamental tenets of democracy is due process. And I was trying to establish some ground rules by which this impeachment, as it was going forward, that Secretary Mayorkas could at least have an opportunity to present witnesses, to see what the charges were, just basic due. It was denied. In the first hearing, in the formal hearing, I offered an amendment to that process, plain and simple. Every Republican on the committee voted against due process.
I think it's shameful, and while I'm grateful to you, Ranking Member, for initiating that, I regret that our colleagues on the other side of the aisle didn't see it the way that we do. I will just conclude here talking a bit about the substance of this. Well, I use that word liberally. There's very little substance here, but to the extent that you can call it that, I'd like to talk about the actual articles. I read through the resolution that was marked up in the report, as well as the dissenting views, which I thought the latter of which were incredibly powerful and compelling. Here's what I'm trying to understand. So, Mr. Chairman Green, you, I know, understand the constitutional standard for impeachment of federal officials, presidents, cabinet officials, and so forth, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think I do.
What crime are you impeaching Secretary Mayorkas for?
It's very clear that misdemeanors, that was from when our founders wrote it, it did not mean a crime. There was very little crime, criminal law back then.
Okay.
So
what offense are you impeaching? It's not a trick question.
So you want to know why we're
the standard under the Constitution, right?
Yeah.
Bribery, treason, or high crimes and misdemeanors. It sounds like what you're saying is that you are impeaching him for a high crime and misdemeanor.
That is correct.
That's
yes.
your argument. Okay, what high crime and misdemeanor are you referring to?
So 7 instances of basically subverting the laws passed by this body, right? So we said shall detain, and he created systems where he didn't,
Okay,
and created
so the
legal
crime-
pathways that don't exist.
Okay, so
I mean,
the-
you can't just say, hey,
I hear
don't
you.
like the way the immigration laws are written, so I'm just going to do them a different
I'm
way.
gonna give you an
If he wants
opportunity
to do
to-
that, he can come to Congress and write the law.
Chairman, I'm going to give you an opportunity to expound on this. Okay, so I think what you said was subverting the law. That's so the high
Yes.
crime and misdemeanor
Yes.
that you believe he should be impeached for is, quote, subverting the law.
Part of
what are
it,
the
yes.
elements of proving that high crime and misdemeanor?
There's no elements of
How are
proving
you
it.
going to go about proving that during a trial in the Senate?
I have a memorandum from him where he actually orders his employees to do just the opposite of what the law says.
I'm not asking you
Oh, I thought you
for
asked for
the
the
evidence.
evidence.
I'm
Okay.
asking you for the elements, okay? Let me try to explain this to you. And I understand you're not a lawyer by training. I served as one of the prosecutors during the last impeachment,
Yeah.
after January 6th. I stood on the floor of the Senate and made the case to the senators that President Trump should be impeached for a constitutional crime. We laid out specific elements and then made the case for why the evidence, that much of which, of course, was later further developed by the January 6th committee, ultimately tied into proving those elements.
Well, if you're an attorney,
So,
then you clearly
I'm asking
understand there
you-
are no elements to a high crime. There's no place in the code
So
where there
you're-
says these are the elements of a high crime.
Got it. Okay. So
I mean,
your contention is that you can, pass a resolution of impeachment, walk into the United States Senate, say, you know what, here's the high crime and misdemeanor, and whatever, if I say I have evidence to prove this crime or misdemeanor, I'm not going to define what the elements are necessary. I'm not going to define the mens rea required to prove this particular crime or offense. I'm just going to say, I believe that he subverted the law, and so therefore
Yeah.
he's impeached.
I mean,
and
he
you should
did
convict him.
subvert the law.
Okay. Well,
A judge ordered that, and he'd been to law school.
Mr. Green, Mr. Chairman, all respect here. I can assure you, having studied the records of the Federal Convention, having
As
read
have
the
I.
Federalist Papers,
As
this
have
is
I.
not what the framers had in mind. The notion that there would just be this nebulous phrase, high crimes and misdemeanors, that would extend to anything and everything that you deem a crime, with no definition as to elements of those crimes. That is not what James Madison or the framers of our Constitution had in mind when they conceived of the constitutional standard for impeachment, period. And that's why legal scholars, conservative ones, liberal ones, witnesses that you all used to call before the Judiciary Committee with regularity, Jonathan Turley, many others, have said this is a baseless impeachment. So I have no idea how you are going to go about proving this high crime and misdemeanor in the United States Senate. I suspect that's why they will reject this the moment it comes over, because unlike prior impeachments, that there hasn't been a good faith or cogent attempt to lay out precisely what the offense standard of proof would be and the ways in which the evidence, and I understand you've said 400 pages, you believe you have ample evidence of this particular policy violation, which you characterize it
policy,
that way.
it's
I
laws
understand
written by
you-
Congress.
I
Laws,
understand.
very important
I understand,
difference.
but your own words, policy violation
No,
that you believe led to a break in, or rather
law,
a violation
yeah.
of the law.
Yeah.
So I understand that that's what you said, but I'm just telling you that this is not what the framers had in mind. I think I missed this exchange that my colleague, the distinguished gentlewoman from New Mexico, engaged with you on a colloquy around James Madison and what he said during the federal convention, and the fact that maladministration was specifically rejected.
And I rejected it as well.
And you rejected as well. It's interesting.
Maladministration.
Maladministration,
Right.
got it. You mentioned a 5-phase plan
Yep.
at the beginning
Yep.
of this questioning. You said the first part of that was dereliction of duty.
Yeah.
Do you know what a synonym for dereliction of duty is? If you look in the local, if any
He's
thesaurus,
not brought up
if
here
you
in these
Google it,
articles.
dereliction
He's
of
brought
duty.
up in the articles for
Sir, let me
breaking the
finish
law.
my statement and then you can respond.
Okay, thanks.
The synonym for maladministration, any thesaurus, anybody who's watching, they can Google it, is dereliction of duty. That has been your definitional narrative for this impeachment from day one. It's what you told this group that you attest was, the underpinning, the first part of your 5-part plan. So the notion that this is not anything more than policy differences that have now been, apparently enveloped in supposed violations of the law, I just don't think the American people are going to buy it.
You and I disagree, and I will tell you this, though. If you ever come before my committee, I will never insult you for not understanding what a Whipple procedure is. or how diabetic ketoacidosis goes, okay?
I hear you.
I promise you.
I'm not
promise
insulting
that.
you, sir.
Yeah.
I'm not insulting you. The point here is
I've read the Constitution.
I hear
okay?
you.
I've read, and I'm not an
Impeachment.
unintelligent human being.
Nobody is accusing you
okay,
of that. What I
okay.
am suggesting
I'm
is that
telling you
the
what Madison
impeachment
said,
constitutional
and my
standard,
interpretation of it.
sir, the impeachment constitutional standard is an exacting one. And when managers, if in fact this impeachment is approved, I understand you're an accomplished position that you've served our country. I have respect for you. What I am suggesting to you is that if and when this resolution passes, managers will be appointed and they will have to walk over to the United States Senate and to present these articles and to prove that in fact the constitutional high crime and misdemeanor has been committed. And what I am saying to you is that your report does not outline the elements of said offense and does not provide a clear sense, roadmap to the country or, in this case, to the accused, the cabinet secretary, who you are trying to impeach for the first, or rather, the second time in the history of the American Republic. There's a reason, sir, that this is rare.
They usually
There's a
resign,
reason,
that's
sir.
why.
There's a
Or get
reason.
fired.
There's a reason why no Congress, Republican-led or Democratic-led, has tried to impeach a cabinet secretary since William Belknap in 1876. 149 years. Another precedent that this Republican Congress is slated to break with apparently great pride. So please don't mistake the passion that I have and that my colleagues have on this side of the aisle for anything but a passion for the Constitution and a very deep concern for the way in which I believe it is being undermined by this